Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groome, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Creative Operations 2.0 podcast. Today, we're going to take a little different approach. Rather than having a guest, we're going to spend some time on a topic that I think is of some urgency for a lot of you guys out there, and that is, what are the questions you should ask yourself before you actually go about buying something as important, as fundamental as a dam? According to some industry experts, there are more than 80 dam products on the market today, ranging from tools that are used by just one or two people to tools that are used by 200 or 300,000 people. And then some dams are used in just a single location in a single studio. And some dams are used by folks who are scattered across the world. So with that range to cover and that number of vendors, all of whom are seeking your attention, how do you organize your thinking about this so you make sure you get the right tool for your needs and with a good growth path ahead of you without buying too much software than you can either afford or have time to manage? So those are the questions we're going to try to ask and answer at least a little bit today. So let's begin. So here are the four critical things to consider when you're implementing a dam. First, your library size. We'll talk about how small, medium, and large libraries, some of them ranging from just a couple hundred assets, some of them perhaps being 1 million or 2 assets, how those different size ranges can really affect your decisions and help you to focus in on tools that are really tailored to your needs. We'll also talk about what I call jobs to be done. How are these assets in a dam meant to be used? Are they meant simply to be downloaded by folks who have the ability to use the different kinds of files that you're storing in the dam, mostly creative operations professionals? Or are they meant to be used by downstream systems for templating, for print production, for web page publishing, and other things of that nature? So we'll talk a little bit about how the jobs to be done by your dam can affect the vendors you begin to evaluate. Third issue, rules and regulations. Simple or complex, basically. Do you have a relatively straightforward user community where everybody is pretty much the same, kind of a democratic environment? Or do you have the need to segment your content and also create many different kinds of user experiences for folks of different skill levels and different authority levels? So those rules and regulations can help you, if you have a sense of what they are, can help you to find platforms that will help you best support them. And then finally, and this is one that often gets overlooked, but I think maybe actually the number one key to success, at least as we've seen it, and that is, is your organization ready to appoint or already have a dam champion? Somebody who takes ownership of this very complex and very fundamental system in your martech stack and who's going to both care for it day to day and plan for its future over the months and years ahead. And when you have a person like that, it changes how you look at vendors too, because that dam champion and the people around them are going to have a relationship with that vendor that could be the key to success. All right, so that's a quick overview. Let's dive into the first question of library size. So as I'd mentioned, you may have a library of just a few hundred assets. We often see that folks who are coming from relatively inexpensive and relatively easy to use file sharing systems on the web often begin to think about a dam when their assets number in the hundreds or perhaps low thousands. And here are the problems that they begin to encounter. Duplication of assets, more and more time spent hunting and pecking for assets. Those are the kinds of problems that usually lead a creative operations team to look for a dam. And if you're at that level, here are the things you're going to want to look for in your vendors. And pretty much every vendor is going to have these things, but you'll probably want to find a platform. If you're planning to stay in this kind of small area, you're really going to be thinking about a platform that focuses on these basic capabilities and doesn't offer a lot of bells and whistles that you'll never use. So basic, text and keyword search. You want a platform that has the ability to extract data from your file names, allows you to add additional metadata to your assets as you go, but doesn't impose a large management challenge on you because probably you don't have the time really to spend with asset libraries of this size on asset tagging. You're probably a small team and you have better things to do than manage a DAM. In that light, you also want to make sure that those tools, even at the small level that we're talking about here, have asset conversion tools on board so that your users can get files transformed in color space or resolution or file format without having to ask you for that assistance. So you're really looking for a small DAM to be a labor-saving tool for a relatively small team. And in order to do that, just one piece of advice would be, especially since your asset library is still small, think about your file name conventions and making sure that those file name conventions clearly express to a non-designer, a non-studio professional, what the purpose and subject material of the asset is. The reason I say that is because in most of your DAMs will pick up that file name and could use the content that's in it to help tag the asset on the way. So without having to get into expensive AI tagging or a big metadata project, you can get good basic metadata and consistent metadata too, so that when your users find a file, they know what it's meant to do and can decide to download that one rather than another. We'll talk more about file name convention in another episode of the podcast. Okay, so that's your small. What about medium? So when you get a medium asset library in the low thousands, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 assets, here's what starts to happen. Those folders and subfolders that you might have created in an online file sharing tool and that you may have created when you first started out with your DAM, they begin to lose their effectiveness either because there are so many that it's hard to scroll through a list of folders, or the nest of folders gets so deep that it's more clicks than a typical user can really comfortably sustain. And so what happens in the medium library is that user behavior moves from browsing for assets really to searching, text searching for assets. Now, of course, when you're in a small library, folks are using search sometimes, but probably they're browsing more. Now your search strategy and your metadata strategy becomes more and more important because at 20,000 assets, it would be very difficult. It can be very difficult if your metadata is not sound for a user to find the specific file they're looking for. How do you solve that? You're looking for vendors whose DAM platform will support a controlled vocabulary. A corporate taxonomy is what the DAM experts call it. And that's really a language that you and your users share in common. So you all know the terms to use, to look for, to use when searching for assets, and the terms to add to assets when you're uploading them. Very often in libraries of this size, we'll find a very small community of asset uploaders and a much larger community of asset downloaders. Those two, the expert and the broad audience, they both need to speak that same language. So look for a DAM vendor who can support a controlled vocabulary. The other thing that you'll want to look for as your library grows is probably a more granular approach to roles and permissions. In small libraries, it's very easy to give all users basically the same level of permissions. Maybe you have a couple administrators and then general users. As your library grows in size, you might find that you have 5, 6, 10 different user types. And you're going to want to be able to set their permissions very precisely. So when you evaluate vendors, look at the roles and permissions area and make sure it gives you the flexibility you need. This is where vendor relationships come into play. You won't always know exactly how to set up a role using the permissions that your DAM vendor offers in their what's called access control module. But they should be able to help you walk through that. Experiment with a couple different cases and then fine tune as time goes by. But right here, even at the medium asset library size, you can begin to see how this is not just a one and done kind of a project. Setting up a DAM is a matter of moving in small increments, testing with your user community, and then adjusting and fine tuning as time goes by. And at this level, You're going to want a vendor who can support you and then train you so that you have the ability to run these things on your own, to the extent, of course, that you want to run them on your own. So that's medium. Let's move to large now, large asset libraries. So these guys, and we see a lot of clients who range from 100,000 assets up to 1 million and 2 million assets. Here's what usually happens, and what you're looking for in your damn vendor. A one-size-fits-all approach to metadata doesn't work anymore. When you have large libraries, you need to be able to actually gather different metadata data points about an asset in one container from a different container. You might need to gather different data points for one brand versus another brand. And so you're going to need a lot of flexibility, not just in user management, but in the asset metadata management. So you're really looking for a DAM that gives you that flexibility over your data point structure. Now, when you get into that, when you start creating unique metadata libraries for each kind of category of assets that you're trying to manage, it can get very complex very quickly. Once again, I'm going to come back to that DAM champion and that relationship with the DAM vendor. So for you folks who are looking to support larger libraries, you're looking for the capability in the software for sure, but you also want to make sure that the team supporting you on the vendor side knows enough about your challenges that they can help you create an information architecture in your DAM. Really, really critical. Another point, performance. So most DAMs today can support a relatively large amount of data storage, at least in terms of megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes. That's not really the issue. Performance becomes an issue when a lot of different users are trying to do the same kind of thing at the same moment in time. So if you're trying to support a large DAM, think about doing some pressure testing on the DAM with lots of transactions happening at the same time and see what the performance looks like. Your vendor should be able to help you with some automated load management tools so that they can show you that experience. I really encourage that because it's frustrating to roll a DAM out that looks beautiful to the user community when 100 or 200 or 300 people are using it. But all of a sudden you start receiving phone calls on a Saturday night. Because the DAM has slowed down right when it's supposed to be supporting a promotion or a consumer event or whatever else it might be. So you don't want to run into those performance problems. You want to check them as you're evaluating your vendors. And then the other thing, of course, this makes sense, but and it's kind of obvious, but it's important to keep it in mind early. A large DAM will likely be a system of record. It will be the single source of truth for your brand assets. And so what that means when you're evaluating and looking for the right vendor, think about all the different ways those assets from that single source of truth are going to be transported and then ultimately used. And you want to make sure not that you have shrink-wrapped integrations for every last connection you might need to make. In fact, I would say I'd be a little wary of folks who are too glib about integrations. The really important thing is to make sure it's possible and to be looking down the road to see if I need to integrate with my email system, and will my DAM give me the ability to do that without delivering files that are inappropriate for use on that system. If I'm trying to integrate with, let's say, my user directory, my LDAP system, will the DAM be able to accept that data without a massive integration project? So you're not looking for push button ease necessarily. Obviously, that's always nice when it's available. But what you're really looking for is the open capability. So an API first architecture. The DAM has been thought of as connecting to other systems from the beginning. And then the second thing, and I may sound like I'm harping on relationships, but you're also going to want to make sure your vendor can be a guide. Somebody who's done this before, this kind of connection before, understands your information architecture and the rules associated with it, and can help guide you through the project. So while it's nice to get push button easy and absolutely free integrations, and that always sounds good, I wouldn't make that the standard. I would make sure that been there, done that is the kind of response you get from your vendors. Okay, so that's asset library size. Lots of things to consider there, and we've just begun. Let me turn to the next topic. Jobs to be done. So as I was mentioning before, dams are meant primarily, of course, for asset storage and retrieval. But the question we have to ask ourselves when we're evaluating our dams is, what are we retrieving those assets for? What are the things, what are they going to be used in? Documents they're going to be used in, workflows they're going to be used in, etc. So let's dive into some of these things because they do affect the vendors that you're going to evaluate. First thing, let's talk basics, asset delivery. So when you are thinking about the dam, ask yourself the question, who are the users out there who are going to be gaining access to these assets? Are they all within the organization, or do you have a large public community as well? Do these folks need the assets in the file format that they were originally uploaded in, or do they need to be able to convert those assets for various and different needs? Do those folks understand the rules and the regulations that are associated with sharing your assets? So do they need to receive license documentation when they're pulling those assets? And do you need the ability to communicate with them as those rights might change, expire, evolve? Those are all really important things to think about when it comes to asset delivery. And depending on the complexity of your needs as you evaluate it, you'll be able to ask your dam vendors to show you those different use cases. So think inside and outside, and think simple and complex. And then the other thing to think about here is the issue of asset ownership. If folks are outside the user community and are in the broader public, and you have assets that you've delivered off system, do you need audit trails that help you to retrieve those assets, or at least alert folks to the use of those assets, or not? And that there's a kind of a bright line, I think, in the dam world where you'll find vendors who are very good at working with external user communities, and you'll find others who focus more on the usage of assets within the organization itself. And then the last thing I'd ask is asset expiration a big issue for you? And if it's not, and you can stay on this side of the bright line, here's what happens. You find yourself evaluating vendors who have lots and lots of capabilities and perhaps an easier price point to sustain than more sophisticated approaches to asset delivery. Next, creative production. This is one of my favorites. It's really where we come from, in the creative operations podcast and actually at Pike and I. So, how much do you really need to oversee the use of the assets that are contained on your dam? If you have external agencies who are pulling those files, do you need to see what they're doing with the images, the logos that you're delivering, or the text content that you're delivering? Do you need to see the final assembled art? Let's say that issue is relatively important to you. You're going to probably be looking for a dam vendor who's got good expertise in the templating world. Not every dam has templating. A lot of them do. Some dams have it as a bolt-on or an add-on, and some have it built in as the purpose of the dam in the first place. That's a really important distinction to keep in mind. And as you think about how these documents that are using these assets are getting created, you should ask yourself the question, how much freedom and how much framework, how much brand framework should my users really have when they're building new materials? And depending on the complexity of your needs, you'll be able to evaluate and present your various vendors with use cases to consider. Get into the details on this. Think about whether or not you want your users to be able to edit brand supplied text or have to supply their own. Whether or not you want to lock down individual sentences or terms within a piece of text, or if you want to give users broad editing capabilities entirely. Whether you want to curate your assets so that users are choosing only from a selection of pictures that really work for a given category or a given document type. Those are the kinds of content management questions you want to be posing to your vendors to see how they respond. And the last point I would make about this is keep an eye on user experience in document creation. Remember, if this is the kind of job that you need done, lots and lots of creative production without overloading your internal agency or your agency of record with mechanical work, if that's a job to be done, you want to take a look at the user experience. Because those users in the field are probably not, like you, a creative operations professional. They're amateurs who have less patience, less skill, less familiarity with all the nuances that go into designing a polished, brand compliant piece. So keep in mind user experience. Take a good hard look at that, not just in a single demo. I would often suggest, and I say this to our customers all the time, give us a bunch of different templates from simple to complex, and let's take a look at how the user experience evolves, but still remains predictable for users over time. Oh, and finally, one last thing. The mix of print and digital in the world of creative operations has changed a lot in the past 10 years, for sure. It used to be we were led by print and then digital was kind of riding along beside us. It's now switched where digital is often the very first thing that you're thinking about. You want a vendor who can go in both directions, I think, these days, who can support advanced animated banners as easily as they can support dynamically sized print templates. You're really looking for capabilities that allow you to create a one-stop shop marketing toolkit for those folks out in the field. Now, of course, this is all if creative production is a job to be done, but keep that in mind. Next, workflows. Workflows are an interesting issue for creative operations professionals because you're so used to them. You're so accustomed to them. And over the years, you've probably used a variety of workflow tools, project management tools, and you've probably developed a deep relationship with one or more of those things. You have to ask yourself the question, do you want your workflows that have really governed your life in the studio, in the creative operations world, to be migrated out to the DAM where you might have a much larger user community? Or do you want to keep your workflows, your agency workflows where they are right now and have the DAM be a recipient of products from them? So do you need work in progress on the DAM? Or should you keep it off the DAM? Really important question to ask yourself and ask your vendors too, because there's a great deal of expertise in workflows that isn't always baked into a DAM. So when a DAM vendor checks the box and says, yes, we have workflows, you really have to ask the question, are they the kind of workflows that I know and love? And do I want that, kind of capability? Because it will limit the number of vendors you're evaluating, but it may also mean you have fewer options from which to choose. So keep that in mind. When you're thinking about workflows on the DAM, though, I'll give you a simple example. A user uploads an asset, and before it's released into the DAM, somebody in authority should take a look at both the quality of the image and the quality of the metadata that's being proposed. That's a simple workflow. If you want that kind of workflow on your DAM, specify that as opposed to what I would call a work in progress, and make sure vendors demonstrate it to you all the way through, so that you can see what happens when an asset is approved, when it's sent back for revisions, when it is rejected entirely. Look at all the different use cases. And my suggestion with DAMs would be reduce the number of workflows you're thinking about supporting, at least at first, and examine those fewer in number workflows in greater depth. Make sure they'll work all the way through, and that they sync up with the roles and permissions flexibility that the DAM provides you. So that's a great place to push your vendor and say, give me an example with my kinds of users and my kinds of assets, a simple workflow that we're going to use a lot. And then the other question that I would ask too, you may have some workflows that don't actually include reference to assets at all. They may be workflows that are associated with text only, that might be associated with merchandise or commercial ordering. If there's a workflow that does not reference an asset at all, you should ask the question, do you want it in the DAM? You may. But if you do, you're going to need a more complex system, and you'll find yourself migrating upward probably in the price range when you do that. So that's another key question to ask. And finally, ordering and purchasing. So very often as DAMs become that single source, they start to grow capabilities, sometimes in a kind of rambling way. But one of the most common is users want to be able or need to be able to purchase either printing and other services, marketing services directly off the system. Or you want to maintain a kind of brand store. So you have brand assets and you have brand merchandise and apparel that needs to be purchased. Ask yourself the question if you want this all to be under one roof. The positives, you really can get better adoption of these capabilities and better flow through of orders on the system if everybody's coming to the same tool for lots of different jobs. The drawback, you may be shoehorning a little bit, into a DAM vendor capabilities that are really, really well served by so many storefront applications. So if your ordering and purchasing needs are relatively simple, keeping them on board the DAM may well be a good choice. Think about it beforehand and try and find vendors who offer that capability, and then look at those specific capabilities in detail. But if you can keep the ordering off system because you have very complex needs, a separate vendor who pulls from the DAM, that downstream integration, might be a better choice. All right, next, brand rules. I see that we've spent a good bit of time here, so let's dive in here quickly. Brand rules range from simple to complex, like everything else in DAM. So before you really get a short list of vendors, think about how simple and or complex and how strict your brand rules need to be. As we talked before, do you need to define custom roles and permission sets for different segments of your user community? Look for that in your vendor. Do your content and assets really need to be deployed differently in, let's say, the eastern region of the world, the nation, and the western region? If you have regionalization to your assets, that will guide you in your choice of a vendor. And especially if your approvals also vary. So you've got different approvers in the east than you do in the west. Those are the kind of specific questions to ask your DAM vendors early, get them to demonstrate to you. And then the other thing that you need to think about is your design guidelines. Everybody loves to say that they have, a real commitment to brand integrity, but when you're evaluating a DAM, ask yourself honestly, how much are you willing to work and pay to ensure brand integrity? And when I say pay, I don't just mean dollars to a vendor. What I really mean is time that is spent reviewing materials that have been executed off the DAM over time. So do you really need close-in approvals, or can you let go a little bit and allow people to work on their own? Do you need to spend time creating user experiences that are very specific and prevent misuse of assets, or can you trust users to do work in compliance with brand guidelines from the word go? Honest answers to those questions will help you decide which DAM vendor has the right set of tools for you, and then what the cost of that is really going to be. Again, both in dollars and in your time. And another thing to think about, and it's a question that I think folks often don't ask themselves, is brand integrity really key to your competitive advantage in the marketplace? Because if you're going to try to make brand integrity a keystone to your system, you're not just going to be doing it once up front. You're going to be doing it every single day. You're going to be devoting yourself to it every single day, watching your users, building templates that ensure the proper use of the brand, creating rules around the use of your assets that does the same thing. So are you ready to go down that road and stay on that road? I think that question is determined by the extent to which your brand is key to maintaining competitive advantage in your marketplace. Finally, DAM champion. So this is my favorite topic, and we'll be doing more episodes on the podcast about it. But here are some simple questions just so we don't take up too much of your time today. For any DAM, even very large DAMs, you don't have to have a massive team of application managers, at headquarters. It can help to have a team for sure, but you've got to at least have one person who sees it as their primary responsibility and who has the knowledge and the background so that they can really work effectively with a vendor. And sometimes, how should I say it? Keep a vendor on the straight and narrow. There's a great expert in the DAM space by the name of Ralph Windsor, who's over at Cloudinary. I, strongly recommend his content every chance I get. But he often talks, and has for years, about the gap between promises that sound really easy, and then actual lived reality in your dams. As you get into this world, particularly if you're on the high side, you want a dam champion who will probe with vendors, keep them honest, make sure they're delivering on their promises. So if they say, hey, we've got AI tagging, let's say, for your assets, show it to us in action. Show it to us with our content. Show it to us with our assets, and take the time to make sure that that promise is going to be part of your lived reality. The only way to do that is for a dam champion to spend a lot of time evaluating vendors and building relationships with them. This is not motherhood and apple pie. This is hard work. And what we've seen over the past, we've been doing this 22 years. What we have seen is when there is a dam champion who has the knowledge, the authority, and the budget to really build a strong relationship with their vendor, that's when you start to see success. And you see sustained success over the course of years and sometimes decades. And believe me when I say that switching from a dam is a disappointing experience. If you spent all the time setting up a major dam and then only to find 2 years or 3 years down the road that you've painted yourself into a corner, for sure you can get out of that corner and, work in a different direction. But the effort that you put into it, really the heart and soul of it, does have to be redone. And that is a disappointing experience. So you want a dam champion who's got some continuity, who's got some authority, and who's got some budget. Don't have to have a big team, but you got to have at least one. One other thing, and then I'll stop. That authority needs to be given the time to document your organization's use of the dam. For sure, you're going to have tons of knowledge-based articles and documentation on the platform itself. But your use of the dam has to be documented as well, so that dam champion, if there's only one or a small number, can transition on, go on to other things in life, and so new people can come in and manage that with your assumptions, your configurations, well understood. And let me pause there and say thank you for taking time here. We spent 30 minutes, which is a lot more than we usually do, but hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.